Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're exploring two texts that might seem worlds apart at first glance. Excerpts from Jean-Yves Le Loup's commentary on the Gospel of Thomas, and an analysis of Hayy ibn Yaqzan, a 12th century Islamic philosophical novel. What's fascinating is that despite their differences in origin and time period, they both grapple with similar profound questions about spirituality and the search for truth. So buckle up, because we're about to uncover some hidden treasures.
Indeed. It's almost like we're setting off on a treasure hunt with two different maps, both leading to a similar destination, a deeper understanding of the human condition and the nature of enlightenment.
Exactly. And you know me, I love a good treasure hunt. Shall we start with the Gospel of Thomas? It's not your typical Sunday school material, that's for sure. Luke even says in his commentary that it's had the greatest impact on our understanding of Christianity. But one thing that always trips me up a bit is the term Gnosis. It comes up a lot in these discussions, and I'm never quite sure I fully grasp its meaning.
Gnosis. It's a tricky one, often misunderstood. It's not just about book smarts, like memorizing facts and figures. It's more about a transformative kind of knowing, a direct experience, where the knower and the known become one.
So it's less about head knowledge and more about a felt sense of truth, something you experience deep within.
Yes. Think of it as an inner awakening, a shift in consciousness. Remember that quote from Le Loup's Forward, the one about the words in the Gospel of Thomas, having the power to touch an unknown part of ourselves and bring an undeniable recognition of truth and hope. That's Gnosis in action.
Oh, right. That quote really stood out to me, too. It's like, those words have a way of bypassing our intellect and speaking directly to our soul.
Exactly, and it's this emphasis on direct experience, on inner transformation, rather than external rituals or dogma. That sets the Gospel of Thomas apart. Now, one thing that's important to keep in mind is that there are different interpretations of what Gnosticism actually means. Le Loup, for example, distinguishes between dualistic Gnosticism, which sees a sharp separation between the spiritual and material world, and non-dualistic Gnosticism, which emphasizes their interconnectedness.
So are you saying that the Gospel of Thomas, as interpreted by Luke, leans more towards a non-dualistic understanding?
Yes, that's right. It's not about escaping the world, but about finding the divine within it, within ourselves. And this is where things start to get really interesting, because we see a similar emphasis on inner transformation in Hayy ibn Yaqzan, even though it comes from completely different cultural and religious context.
That's intriguing. So how does Hayy ibn Yaqzan explore this idea of inner transformation?
Well, imagine this. A baby abandoned on a deserted island, raised by a doe. No human contact, no external teachings. Yet this child, Hayy, grows up to achieve a profound understanding of the universe and a direct experience of God through observation, reason, and deep contemplation. It's an allegory for the journey of the soul towards enlightenment.
Okay, that's a powerful image. But what specifically about Hay's journey leads him to this enlightenment? It can't just be about being alone on an island, right?
Right. It's not just about isolation. There are specific steps, specific realizations that Hayy goes through. He starts by observing the natural world around him, learning from the animals. And eventually, through reason and introspection, he comes to understand the interconnectedness of all things. And this leads him to a direct experience of the divine.
So it's like his journey mirrors our own potential for self-discovery. We too can learn from observing the world around us, from reflecting on our experiences, from using our reason to understand the deeper truths of existence.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that Hay's journey, although fictional, touches on philosophical themes that were central to European thought centuries later. His exploration of consciousness, the limitations of sensory knowledge, the power of reason. These are themes that philosophers like Descartes would grapple with much later in history.
It really makes you wonder about the hidden connections
Yeah.
between different cultures and time periods, doesn't it? It's like these fundamental human questions keep resurfacing in different forms throughout history.
Absolutely. And it's this universality, this shared human quest for understanding that makes exploring these texts so enriching. Now, in Islamic philosophy, there's a concept that's particularly relevant to Hay's journey, the idea of fitra.
Fitra. I'm not familiar with that term. What does it mean?
Fitra refers to the innate disposition towards goodness, the capacity for reason and spiritual insight that is believed to be present in every human being from birth. It's like a seed of divinity within us, waiting to be nurtured and to blossom. And Hay's journey, even though he's isolated from any religious teachings or social structures, is a testament to this innate potential, this inherent capacity for spiritual awakening that we all possess.
This is like saying we're not starting from scratch. We're not blank slates. We're born with this potential for enlightenment already within us.
Precisely. And it's through experiences like Hay's, through deep contemplation and a willingness to look inward, that this potential can be realized.
Okay, so we have the Gospel of Thomas, with its emphasis on Gnosis and inner awakening, and Hayy ibn Yaqzan, using this allegorical story of a self-taught mystic to illustrate a similar idea of innate spiritual potential. I'm starting to see how these two seemingly disparate texts might be connected, how they might be pointing towards a similar understanding of the human condition.
Exactly. And it's this convergence, this shared emphasis on inner transformation as the key to spiritual fulfillment. That we'll be exploring further as we delve deeper into these fascinating texts.
So both the Gospel of Thomas and Hayy ibn Yaqzan are pointing us towards this idea of inner transformation. But I'm curious, did they give us any concrete examples of what this inward shift might actually look like in our lives? It's a beautiful concept, but can you help me connect it to something tangible?
That's a great question. And yes, both texts offer some really compelling examples. In the Gospel of Thomas, for instance, Jesus often talks about the kingdom of God being within. It's not a physical place you travel to, but rather a state of consciousness you cultivate.
Right. I remember that line from Logan 3. If you do not know yourselves, then you dwell in poverty, and it is you who are that poverty. It's like he's saying true wealth isn't about material possessions, but about self-knowledge, about understanding who we truly are at our core.
Exactly. And if we connect that to Hayy ibn Yaqzan, we see this idea mirrored in Hay's journey. He doesn't find fulfillment in material things or social status. Instead, it's his solitary contemplation, his communion with God. That brings him true contentment. Remember how he actually chooses to leave society and return to the solitude of his island after interacting with others?
You're right. That decision always struck me as a bit radical. But it does suggest that maybe lasting joy and contentment aren't found in external achievements or validation, but in something deeper, something we cultivate within ourselves.
Precisely. And this inner transformation often leads to a detachment from worldly concerns, a shift in priorities that we see reflected in both texts.
Can you give me some specific examples of what this detachment from worldly things might look like, especially in the context of these texts? I'm trying to imagine how I might apply these ideas to my own life.
Of course. In Logan 110 of the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, "Whoever has found the world and become wealthy, may they renounce the world." It's a powerful statement that encourages us to look beyond the allure of material possessions and to prioritize spiritual growth, which might mean making different choices in our lives, choices that align with our values rather than societal expectations.
That makes me think about all the messages we're bombarded with daily. Buy this, achieve that, look like this. It takes real intentionality to step back and say, wait, what truly matters to me?
Exactly. And that's where the wisdom of these texts can be so helpful. In Hayy ibn Yaqzan, we see this detachment beautifully illustrated in Hay's ultimate decision to return to the simplicity of his island, leaving behind the complexities and distractions of human society. It's a powerful image that speaks to the importance of creating space for contemplation, for connecting with what truly nourishes our souls.
I think many people can relate to that feeling, that yearning for simplicity, amidst the chaos of modern life. It makes me wonder if this concept of detachment is actually a form of asceticism. But I always thought asceticism was about self-punishment or deprivation, and that doesn't seem to be what these texts are advocating for.
You've hit on a common misconception. Asceticism, in both Christian and Islamic traditions, isn't about punishing yourself. It's about simplifying your life, removing distractions, and creating space for spiritual practices that bring you closer to what you value most. It's about prioritizing what truly matters and letting go of what doesn't.
So it's less about deprivation and more about intentional focus, about aligning your actions with your deepest values and aspirations.
Exactly. It's about taking control of your life, creating space for what nourishes your soul, even if it means letting go of some things that society tells us are important. Now, this brings us to another fascinating parallel between the Gospel of Thomas and Hayy ibn Yaqzan. Both texts grapple with the limitations of language. When it comes to expressing profound spiritual experiences, have you ever felt like words couldn't quite capture the essence of something you experienced?
All the time, especially when it comes to things like love, beauty, or a sense of awe.
Exactly. Both the Gospel of Thomas and Hayy ibn Yaqzan rely on symbolism, metaphors, and parables. To convey truths that go beyond the limitations of words, it's like they're trying to point us towards a deeper understanding. That can be experienced, but not fully articulated.
It makes me think about how we often use metaphors to explain complex scientific concepts, like comparing the structure of an atom to a miniature solar system. It helps us grasp something that's otherwise difficult to visualize.
That's a great analogy. And in the same way, these texts use symbolic language to convey spiritual truths that might otherwise be inaccessible to our rational minds.
So are there any specific examples in these texts where this reliance on symbolism is particularly striking? I'm curious to see how they use this language of the soul
Hmm.
to point us toward a deeper understanding.
Absolutely. In the Gospel of Thomas, for example, there's the parable of the sower in Logion 9. Jesus talks about seeds falling on different types of ground, some thriving and some withering. It's a metaphor for how the same teachings, the same spiritual truths, can have very different effects, depending on the receptivity of the individual.
Oh, I see. It's not just about hearing the words, but about the inner soil that receives them,
Hmm.
about our own readiness to understand and integrate these teachings into our lives.
Precisely. And this takes us back to that idea of inner transformation we were talking about earlier. The teachings themselves aren't enough. It's our own inner work, our own willingness to cultivate that fertile ground within. That allows the seeds of wisdom to take root and blossom.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And what about Hayy ibn Yaqzan? How does it use symbolism to convey its message?
Well, in Hayy ibn Yaqzan, the symbolism is woven throughout the entire narrative. The island itself is a symbol of the human soul. And Hay's journey from its shores to its mountainous heights mirrors the soul's ascent towards spiritual enlightenment. Even the doe that raises him can be seen as a symbol, representing the nurturing power of nature, the innate goodness that guides us, even in the absence of human instruction.
So it's like the story itself is a kind of map, and the symbols are landmarks that help guide us on our own inner journey. I love that.
Exactly. Both texts invite us to go beyond the surface level of language and to engage with this deeper symbolic meaning. It's about attuning ourselves to the subtle language of the soul, a language that speaks through images, metaphors, and archetypes.
You know, as we're talking about this, I'm struck by the fact that both texts, while emphasizing the importance of this inner transformation, also acknowledge the inherent challenges in communicating these experiences to others.
That's a very astute observation. It gets at the heart of a central tension in both texts, the paradox of enlightenment. The journey often begins in solitude, but then there's this natural human desire to share what we've discovered, to connect with others on a deeper level. But how do you communicate something that's ultimately beyond words?
Right. It's like trying to explain the taste of chocolate to someone who's never tried it.
Yeah.
You can use all the words you want, but they won't truly understand until they experience it for themselves.
Exactly. And this challenge is highlighted in both the Gospel of Thomas and Hayy ibn Yaqzan. Think about Logion 6, where the disciples ask Jesus about practical matters like fasting and prayer. And Jesus responds with, "Don't lie, and don't do what you hate, because everything is visible before heaven."
It's such a radical response. He's basically redirecting their focus from external rituals to internal alignment. It's like he's saying, true spirituality is about living authentically, in accordance with your conscience, not about following a set of rules.
You got it. It highlights the gap between external actions and the inner transformation that Jesus is pointing towards. And then you have Hayy ibn Yaqzan, where Hayy tries to share his spiritual insights with the people on the neighboring island and is met with resistance and misunderstanding. Ultimately, he chooses to return to his solitary life of contemplation, recognizing the limitations of trying to convey these profound truths to those who haven't experienced them firsthand.
It's a poignant illustration
Yeah.
of how difficult it can be to bridge that gap, the gap between those who have had a direct experience of something profound and those who haven't. It's like speaking different languages.
Precisely. And this brings us to the concept of esotericism,
Yeah.
the idea that some knowledge is reserved for those who are prepared to receive it. Now, I know this can sound a bit exclusive,
But
but
I get it. Not everyone is at the same point on their journey. And some truths, as you said, can only be understood through direct experience.
yes. And sometimes sharing those truths prematurely can actually be a disservice. It's like trying to explain calculus to someone who hasn't even learned basic algebra yet. They might hear the words, but the meaning won't truly sink in until they have the necessary foundation.
That makes sense. It's about respecting where people are on their path. And this idea of esotericism reminds me of that passage from Hayy ibn Yaqzan, where the author says, "Nonetheless, I have not left the secret set down on these few pages entirely, without a veil, a sheer one, easily pierced by those fit to do so, but capable of growing so thick to those unworthy of passing beyond that they will never breach it."
That's a great connection. It's like he's saying the truth is available to all who sincerely seek it, but it reveals itself according to our readiness to receive it.
I love that. So as we wrap up our deep dive into these two fascinating texts, the Gospel of Thomas and Hayy ibn Yaqzan, What would you say are the key takeaways for our listener? What do you hope they'll walk away with?
Oh, I think both texts, despite their differences in origin and time period, offer us a profound message about the importance of inner transformation. They remind us that true fulfillment isn't found in external achievements or possessions, but in the cultivation of self-knowledge, wisdom, and a deep connection with something larger than ourselves, whether you call that God, the divine, or simply a sense of interconnectedness with all things.
It's like both texts are inviting us to embark on our own inner treasure hunt, to discover that kingdom within that Jesus speaks of in the Gospel of Thomas, or to climb the mountain of self-discovery like Hayy and Hayy ibn Yaqzan.
Exactly. And both texts also acknowledge the paradoxical nature of this journey. It often begins in solitude, requiring a certain detachment from worldly concerns, but ultimately it can lead us to a deeper connection with humanity, a recognition of our shared essence.
I'm reminded of that line from the Gospel of Thomas, when you make the two into one, you will be a son of man. It's like this journey of individuation, of discovering our true selves, paradoxically leads us to a greater sense of unity and connection with all beings.
That's beautifully put, and it speaks to the transformative power of this inner work. It doesn't just change us as individuals, it ripples outward, affecting our relationships and our understanding of the world.
It's like that image of a single candle illuminating an entire room. The light doesn't stay confined to the flame. It spreads outward, dispelling darkness.
I love that image. And it leads us to a final thought-provoking question for our listener to ponder. If Hay's journey on a deserted island is an allegory for our own solitary search for truth, what does it mean to return to society after experiencing a glimpse of enlightenment? Is it possible to integrate those profound insights, those moments of clarity and connection, into our daily lives, our interactions with others, our work in the world?
That is a powerful question. It challenges us to think about how we can bridge the gap between those moments of spiritual insight and the often messy, complex reality of our everyday lives. How do we bring that light back with us and let it shine through our actions, our words, and our interactions with others?
Precisely. It's a question worth pondering. And perhaps as we navigate the challenges of our modern world, the wisdom of these ancient texts, the Gospel of Thomas and Hayy ibn Yaqzan, can serve as guideposts, reminding us of the importance of inner transformation, the power of symbolism, and the enduring human quest for meaning and connection.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. It's been a truly enlightening journey. And for you, dear listener, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.